going to start this morning. I'm going to do something a little different. We're going to go down a little bit of a path to get to our topic. And so some of you that are really particular, you might say, this doesn't really, when you look back at the sermons, maybe that didn't make a connection. Hopefully, though, it'll make it even more powerful near the end when you're like, oh, that really makes a lot more sense. And I want to start this morning with something that happened to me years ago. I never forgot this. I even kind of remember the feeling. I went through drive-through. I was on my way to a board meeting in Toronto, and I went through the drive-through, and I was going to be there for hours. I didn't bring a lunch, and so I thought, you know what? I'm just going to get an egg sandwich, a muffin, and a coffee, and that'll last me until the meeting was something like 10 till 3 or something like that. So I just wanted something to eat, and I remember I got there, and I was trying to watch my health, but it was a totally different order. Stuff I was like, I'm not going to eat that, like soaked in butter, like hash brown, and I'm like, I didn't want that. I was so mad at that McDonald's because they messed up that order, and then I was going to go hungry because I wasn't about to eat that hash brown. And I remember driving back to that McDonald's. I saved it so I could prove it. I was like, look what you gave me this morning. It's like I had to sit through this whole meeting. I couldn't believe what you did. And, oh, I'm so sorry, sir. Here's a coupon for some free food for later. I know how it works. McDonald's used to work there. So I got a $20 meal for later. But then I look back, and I thought, there's a lot of crisis situations like that, right? I mean, when we have, slow Wi-Fi, or they make your coffee wrong, and you can't drink it now, and you happen to be on the 401, and you can't go back. Or there's a big lineup. You're on your lunch break. You only have an hour. There's a huge lineup, right? Your social media goes down. Some of you are laughing. Some are like, is she serious? Yeah. The point is, for most of us, these things are not crisis situation. I didn't handle that right. I could have gone back a little more like, yeah, listen, this is what happened. And, it's not a big deal. The very fact that you even can have food on demand like that. I mean, we get so upset. We call these, some of us, for some of us, this is a crisis. This is a problem. And someone once said, I forget who it was, but they were at McDonald's or they were at a Starbucks or something, and someone said, we have a real problem. I got the wrong, I didn't get the right cream in my milk or cream in my coffee or whatever. And the person in line behind them said something like, no, man, that's not a problem. World hunger is a problem. Something like this, to kind of give the idea there's bigger problems out there in the world. But I wanted to bring this up because when you talk about problems and crisis, it all depends on your situation. Psychologists say for some people, some of these things can actually be bigger and affect us more than we think, even though they're smaller situation. But when you look at a crisis situation, we talked about David's life a couple of years ago. And you remember in David's family, David was this good guy known for David and Goliath, the Psalms that he wrote, and he loved God. He was the king of Israel. All the kings were compared to him. And all of a sudden we see him sinning. He commits adultery with another man's wife, and then he has that guy killed to kind of hide it. And it was bad, and David paid for it. And with David and his kids, we see, so many problems that arose from this. Where you see one of his sons kills another. You have Amasa here, a distant relative of David, and he's killed by another relative of David. You have David's best friends betraying him. You have all kinds of things, or his closest counselor betraying him. You have all kinds of problems cropping up in David's life because of the sin with Bathsheba. But I wanted to point out, and when you look at it, here's some of the consequences. We looked at this a couple of weeks ago. I'm not going to spend much time here. But I don't know if we're really aware, David actually faced many problems before his sin with Bathsheba. He faced a whole slew of problems. Here's a map that has this place. They're still looking for it today. Nobody knows where it is for sure. Ziklag. Does anybody put your hand up if you can remember Ziklag in the Bible for anything? Couple? Ziklag is the place where David lived for a year and a half. He was on the run from Saul. Why? He did nothing wrong. God anointed him the next king, and Saul was trying to kill him. David loved God. He was doing what's right, and he's on the run fearing for his life. And he goes to this this city of Ziklag, which is in the territory of the Philistines. So, the king in Judah, and if you look over here, here's Jerusalem. There's where, the capital here of Israel, basically. And then they split, there's capital in the north. But anyways, in this territory here, here's Ziklag, so they're not going to look in someone else's country. So David lives there for 1.5 years. And one day when he's out on his ventures, he's gone, and another group of people come up. They burn everything to the ground. They take his wives and all the men, their wives and their belongings, their animals, and they burn their homes. He lost everything. So like a house fire. You can imagine how devastating a house fire is. Not only that, you look at the problems that David had because, why? Because he was anointed. His best friend, Jonathan, I say best friend, he's probably his best friend. Jonathan said, David, I know. Jonathan was Saul the king, Saul's son. And Jonathan said, I know you're going to be the next king. And I'm okay with that. I'm going to be your right-hand man. Saul basically said, to his son, don't you realize you are supposed to be the king, not David. And if you're friends with him, he's going to be the next king. And Jonathan said, David, I want you to be the next king. I'm going to be your right-hand man. And they loved each other's phileo love that was so strong. It said he loved Jonathan's description of love more than anyone else in the world. So I say best friend. And before his best friend could take that position beside him, he was killed in battle. He lost his best friend. His wife Michal was taken from him and given to another man. He's living in a cave. His house burns down. He's on the run. He rescues some people. They're going to betray him. His closest advisors turn on him. Over and over and over, we see problems, and David did nothing wrong at this point. And so we ask why. Why do bad things happen to us? And there's a couple of reasons, but there's a reason why bad things happen after David sinned with Bathsheba. But why did he have such a hard life before? Well, many of us have difficulties, and we don't always know, but there's some answers the Bible hints at. In John chapter 9, they say, Lord, why was this man born blind? Did his parents sin or did he sin? And Jesus said, neither. This is because God has plans for him. God's going to use him for something amazing. Okay, so that's one reason. Maybe it's not such a bad thing. Maybe the things we go through, maybe there's a reason that it's going to turn into a good thing. Okay? You look at, I found this online. It's a great picture. I really like it here. David, when he's on the run, he's anointed king, and he has to wait years before he actually becomes king. Abraham, you're going to have a son. He has to wait years before he has that son. That promise comes true. 25 years. Noah waiting for the flood. Joseph, when he's in prison and he's going to be elevated to second in charge, but it's years of problems. Why does God make us wait? Why all these problems before the good things come? Because there's a story that's going on. There's many things that are happening in Joseph's case. Think about the people he met in jail and the things he had to tell them. God used him to affect other people along the road. It's not an easy path in life. And maybe it has nothing to do with this life. God says that sometimes the things that we are experiencing or the things that the faith we hold on to during those difficult times, sometimes that's there because God is showing the spiritual forces that are around us something. He's teaching them something, using us. Maybe it's not about us learning something. Maybe it's about spiritual forces learning something. And we see that there's a spiritual component to Job. When Satan comes before God, where have you been? Roaming the earth, looking for someone to devour. Well, have you considered Job? Like if you're Job, you're like, no, quiet, get him away, right? So this idea that there's more going on that we don't know. We don't always know the why. But sometimes bad things happen because of the punishment for our sin. Sometimes it's directly because of what we did, and sometimes it's a consequence of someone else's sin, someone else's problem, right? Someone else does something bad, and maybe they do something that affects maybe their children or something. Their children affect your children, whatever. We don't know what, all the situation. But sin causes problems. And we know that right back to the beginning. When he talked to the woman and he talked to the man and said, because what you did, here's a problem. Here's what's going to happen. So we don't always know why life is challenging and difficult, but we remember Jesus said to his disciples, in this world you will face troubles. If you think you don't have troubles right now, troubles may be coming. We will face trouble at some time. And when we face trouble, here's the lead up. Are we there to help each other through it? You see, while God allows some of the troubles to happen, he's also calling us to help each other out when we're in difficult situations. He wants us to be loving, to be kind, to encourage, to lift up, to support, to help. He wants us there for one another. Each of us has different situation in life. Some of us were born into wealth. Some of us are born into a good part of the world that has a lot of resources. Some of us are born into a time in history when it's better than other times in history. Some of us are born with good health. Others, we've had a series of bad health, and maybe some issues that cost a lot of money and take a lot of time and don't allow us to do things that other people can do. Some of us have family that can care for us, and some of us, we have no one there to take care of us. We're all in different situations, but God calls us to take care of one another. And I want us to look at what God said to his people in Deuteronomy. He says, and now listen, what does the Lord God ask you except to fear the Lord by walking in all his ways, and to love him, and to worship him with all your heart and all your soul? What does it mean to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength? One of the things it means is to follow his commands. And later on we see this, verse 17 to 19. God executes justice for the fatherless and the widow, and he loves the resident alien, giving him food and clothing. To the orphans, to the widows, to those who are visitors, or those who have come into your nation from other places, God wants you to be kind to them. You are to do this because God does this. And over and over and over, in particular, we see God teaching us about the widows and the orphans. Now, when we talk about widows, we're doing a family series, and we're talking about families. One of the things we'll talk about is, differences in families and how we take care of each other. And one of the challenges we find in society is those who have no family to take care of them, or those who have lost a spouse. We talk about widows, those who are maybe living alone, or they don't have anyone to take care of them. Back in Israel's day, back in the old times, back in the Bible times, we kind of like to look back and we project back in history, how things are today. We forget what things might have been like. And for a widow living back then, and in different societies, but in history, in general, in the Bible, it was very difficult because land was tied to the men. For the widows living back then, they could be easily taken advantage of, and you could lose your land if you had no man to take care of you. And the widows back then, if you had no sons to go and work in the fields or to go out there and work, we think, well, how is that fair? Is this a patriarchal society and how that works? I just want to remind us of one thing. There are a lot of differences when you read the Bible. We think about men and women and some of the differences, and we're going to be coming to this when we talk about husbands and wives and all this. But there are a lot of differences between men and women and things that you could not do back then. So when we talk about childcare, a simple example, they did not have refrigerators. That makes a huge difference on food, how you store food, how you gather food, what food you can take, how you're going to babysit. Here's my baby. I have to go out for a while. What do I feed the baby? I can't feed this baby. It's not like, oh, here, I got some Enflac from the store, and here's a bottle. And, there's a lot of things that they didn't have. There are differences between men and women that made cultures, societies work differently. So you might have a difficult time reading this. So I'm just gonna highlight a few of the differences here. Something simple like our color perception. More men are colorblind than women. Our eyes being able to track, being able to look at textures and color, depth perception, facial recognition. Women have better facial recognition than men. Hearing sensitivity. Women generally have stronger hearing sensitivity, higher pitches, they can hear better. A better sense of smell. Men, of course, you've got difference in muscle mass, difference in endurance, bone density, less bones breaking. But women, more joint flexibility, but also you can have more higher injury risk. Metabolism, cold sensitivity, sweat production, pain processing, immune response, blood oxygen capacity. We think of things that become obvious when it comes to the things like hair loss, the thickness of skin and how oily your skin gets. Men generally have thicker skin, more oily skin. Sleep disorders. More men have sleep disorders than women. Risk-taking behavior. More men are likely to take risks. Multitasking, social processing. Women are better at that. Longevity. Women outlive men. I forget by how many years, but in general. And again, this isn't true for every man and every woman, but this is just basics, just generally speaking. Infant response sensitivity, fine motor precision, endurance, lower body endurance. There's a lot of differences between men and women. And so the differences just mean that there's going to be differences in social structure, in the way societies work. And when you live in a society where there's no excavators and there's less machinery out there, when war happens in a different way without the technology we see today, there's a lot of differences in the way that men and women are called to respond in society. And so having children, relying on children, was very important in society. And so a very important job is raising those children up and being sure that those children are healthy, strong, and safe to continue on society in various capacities. And so God knows that the widows were very vulnerable. And God highlights to us over and over and over in the Bible to be just with widows, to look out for widows, to take care of them. And Jesus even highlights a couple of stories to defend them. And he highlights the story of the widow who comes and gives her little 2 pennies, those 2 mites, knowing how important that any money she might have, how long you have to stretch that out because you don't get money that easily. When Jesus says, come here guys, look at her. And she gave more than everyone else because it was harder for her to get money, and she gave of what she did not have. Jesus also mentions this story that was read to us this morning. God sent Elijah to a widow outside of Israel. And when Jesus comes to his hometown, he's speaking to his hometown in Nazareth there. And he talks to them about there were many widows in Elijah's day. But God sent Elijah to a widow outside of their nation, in a different nation, Zarephath. So why would God do that? We read here, and I'm not going to go through this whole story, but we read that God had told her, God had commanded her, he had talked to her, that she was going to bump into Elijah, and she was instructed what to do, to feed him. And you see that up here in verse 9. I have instructed a widow there to feed you. How did that happen? How did God speak to her? There's a lot of questions we just don't know. But we know that she was instructed to take on this prophet. There was a famine, 3.5-year famine. The prophet comes to her. Elijah comes to this widow, and he says, "Can I have a little bread as well?" And she said, "I'm just making my last meal. We're about to die. This is all we have." But she gave it to him. She gave him this little bit of food, and she said, only a handful of flour left in the jar and a little cooking oil at the bottom of the jug. I was just gathering a few sticks to cook my last meal, and then my son and I will die. That's how desperate she is. And Elijah said, "Don't be afraid. Go ahead and do just what you've said, but make a little bread for me first." "Well, that's less for me. If I give you bread, you're taking away from the little I have." That's like saying, if you only have 2 pennies left, give one to me, but you need 2 pennies to buy something. This is very important for her, but she does it. She goes ahead and does it. So she did as Elijah said, and then God blessed them. God continued to make sure that oil and flour didn't run out. So, in order to understand what's happening here, you have to understand the culture. In Israel, the Israelites, they were not following God. They had allowed another god, Baal, and they were worshiping Baal and Ashtoreth. They were putting their trust outside of God and these other gods of fertility and gods of the harvest. And so here's a widow who listened to God, one who's faithful. And again, we see this a little later on with another widow. And I'm just going to roughly, this is Elisha. Elijah's, this is who Elijah was mentoring. Elisha comes. And he meets another widow, the wife of one of the students of, the sons of the prophets, these students, like a disciple of the prophets. Her husband died, and now she was going to lose her sons to pay the debt. And she calls out and asks Elisha for help. And again, she is faithful. She obeys. And if you read the story, Elisha said, "Go and borrow empty containers from all your neighbors, and do not get just a few. Then shut the door behind you and pour the oil into all these containers." She only has a little jar. How is she going to fill all these containers? But it says, so she left. And she shut the door behind her and her sons, and they kept bringing containers. She did exactly what was told. And the oil never ran out. She was able to fill every single container. And then they were able to sell those containers to pay their debt. Obedience, faithfulness, and God's provision. And so that brings us to us today. In Acts chapter 6, the early church took care of widows. They had a daily distribution of food. And we know the early church cared for widows. Paul writes to Timothy, support widows who are genuinely in need. The widow who is truly in need, left all alone, puts her hope in God. And God, instead of sending an Elijah or an Elijah, God is sending you and I. We are the Elijahs and the Elishas that God is sending to those widows in need. And not just the widows, to the orphans, to all those in need. We do the best we can as God's church. We are the answer to their prayers sometimes. God answers in one way, but sometimes you're the answer to their prayer. When you show up at the door and you have a knock on the door. And sometimes in this culture, they're not taken advantage of as they were back then. But sometimes there's other needs that our widows have. And we're not there. Maybe it's a need just to help them maybe navigate, the internet. So they're not going to get ripped off with some of these, schemes out there to try and take their money. And sometimes it's a matter of just company, or bringing them out for groceries, or shoveling a driveway. Maybe there's a need just to keep them from becoming too lonely, or to play a game with them, or to do something with them that they enjoy to remind them they're not alone. But there are needs for our widows. And so we're told, as Paul says to Timothy, support widows who are genuinely in need. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, they should practice godliness toward their own family first. If there's a widow in your family, instead of saying, well, the church does it all, that's fine. No, you have a responsibility to care for your parents and grandparents just as they cared for you when you were younger. That's the principle that God is showing us here. But when not able, or when family fails, and we're not able, or someone doesn't have faith in their families, the church steps in to help. We help all those people. We defend the widows and the fatherless. We should be there as a beacon of light to those who can't help themselves. And so the last two passages that I want to present here and remind us. In one sense, when you work and you're like, oh man, I don't have anything for myself because I'm always giving. If that's what happens to your life, is that you are just known for giving. Now there is a verse that says, God doesn't want you to give so much that now you're the one in need. But God does want us to share with each other so there's equality. And this is a principle that's out there. To work hard with your hands so that you have something to give. Isn't that a blessing? And that doesn't just mean physically working with your hands, but be wise, be good stewards of what you have. Be wise and go out and be willing to work and do what you can. Not just to hoard up so that at the end of the day you can sit back and say, what am I going to do? I'm going to build bigger barns and just take life easy. Remember what Jesus said about, the foolish builder there? And he says, you fool, this very night your life will be taken from you. Then who will get it? No, we continue to work so we have something to share, and especially to those who are in need. And again, maybe you say, well, we don't have people in the same needs, but there are things you can do. And so practice maybe even in your discipleship group. One of the service opportunities is go and find someone, maybe one of the widows in our congregation, or maybe you have a neighbor or someone in need, and spend some time with them. And then you will find a reward. And sometimes the reward is not what's coming, but the reward in how you understand what God's called you to do. I remember the first time I thought about this, and I said, okay, I'm going to try and help some of the widows in the church. And I remember I was 19 years old. I was just growing in my faith. And I remember I had a 1986 IROC with T-tops and this low. It was IROC's a Camaro. And I remember I'm going to try and pick up one of the widows in our church and take her for lunch. And so that's what I did. I pulled up, and she was living in one of the homes, and I pulled up. And she had a hard time getting down into the car. I remember that. It was the first thing I noticed. And I took her out for lunch. And at that time, I was making good money. And I said I would not let her pay. And I would do this. I would try and take her out every 2 or 3 months. I'd try and take her out. Not just her. There was actually 2 ladies in the church that I would meet. Sometimes I'd bring them out together. And sometimes I would take them grocery shopping. And I remember one time I took them for lunch. And one of the preachers said to me, Jamie, sometimes you have to let them pay, because I would fight with her. You can't pay. There's no way. Sometimes you have to. That's all she can do, and she's able to do it. She didn't need your money, but she wanted your company. And I'll never forget, the one time I took them out. Sometimes it's not comfortable, because she paid. I let her pay. I wasn't comfortable with that. And I remember she left $1 tip, and I wasn't comfortable with that too. And so when she wasn't looking, I put some extra money on the table for her tip. And she turned around and seen it. No. And she put it back in my pocket. And I said sorry to the waitress as we left. And that wasn't comfortable. And it wasn't comfortable when I dropped her off one time. And I remember she would always kiss me on the cheek. And one time I got a kiss on the lips more than just once. And I wasn't comfortable with that. And I remember stopping. I was 19. I didn't like it. But I'll tell you what. The joy that I experienced feeling that I did the right thing, and after she passed, knowing that I didn't have regrets not taking care of her, I did the best I could. And the rest of the church people were also trying, and together as a family, she knew we were her family. She had no one else. We were her family. And that's what family does for one another. So may God help us to continue to remember to take care of the poor, the fatherless, and in particular this morning as we focus on the widows. And ask what we can do, because if everyone does a little bit, we remind them that they're not alone, that they have God as their father, and they're filled with a family of brothers and sisters that God has provided for them to take care of them. May God bless us as we do his will and listen to his word.